In ancient Near Eastern societies, the king was considered to be the image of God. He ruled over and mediated. It seemed that some people were destined to rule over others. But the Bible breaks ranks with the rest of the ancient Near Eastern cultures. In Genesis 1 shows that each and every human being, male and female, is not just in ancient Near Eastern societies, the king was considered to be the image of God. The king ruled and mediated. It seems that some people were destined to rule over others. But the Bible is different. Genesis 1 breaks with the rest of Near Eastern tradition. Each and every human being, male and female, bears the image of God. In the image of God, we are all kings and queens. No one is destined to rule over another. No one is born with a right to domination. That is one big difference in the creation story of Israel from other ancient Near Eastern stories. But there's more. When other ancient Near Eastern societies wrote their creation stories, the narrative always culminated in the creation of the civilization telling the story. So, for example, the Babylonian creation story culminated in the creation of Babylonia. But the Bible rejects this path. The creation story told in Genesis does not culminate in the creation of ancient Israel, but rather with the creation of the whole world and with all humankind. Adam. We meet Adam before Abraham. The Genesis 1 story is about the creation of the earth and all its peoples. The Bible is profound in its commitment to a sense of shared humanity and biodiversity. The text says God created fruit-bearing trees of every kind and vegetation of every kind, birds of every kind, vegetation of every kind, animals of every kind, and wild beasts of every kind. By the time God creates Adam, we are so conditioned that we expect to hear that God created human beings of every kind. But no, there is only one species, humans. Adam means humankind. Sure, the Bible will soon narrow its lens to focus on the people of Israel and their unique covenant with God. Even as soon as Genesis 11, God insists on the diversity of language and cultures. But first, Genesis 1 builds on a sense of shared humanity. We are, first and foremost, children of Adam, children of a man. In the same spirit of Genesis 1, rabbinic tradition teaches that God created Adam so that no man may say to another, "My father is greater than your father." We are all descended from one Father. So all forms of racism and bigotry are a brazen denial of God as the creator of all life. The text even goes out of its way to assert that male and female, God created them. So sexism and misogyny are an obscene desecration of God's name. Every human being we come across, black or white, male or female, hedge fund manager or homeless person, is royalty created in the image of God. Genesis 1 is a breathtaking call for human worth and dignity for all mankind. That's hard. White folk struggle to see that people of color are just as human and precious as themselves. People who are wealthy may forget that poor people are just as precious and just as human. Able-bodied persons often fail to see that people with disabilities are just as human and precious as they are. People who are heterosexual frequently forget that people who are not are just as human, just as precious. Men forget that women are also just as human and precious, with a right to walk through the world without being demeaned or degraded or assaulted. It's easy to end up on the wrong side of the struggle for human dignity. Beware of bigots that are quoting texts, of clergy who imagine that God hates all the same people they do. True religion, yes, including our own, is countercultural, rebelling against all kinds, any manner of assault on people's dignity, just as in Genesis 1. In serving God, sometimes we must speak painful truths to political leaders. We must differentiate ourselves from those spewing fear-mongering and hatred. There is also another dimension to Genesis 1. In the ancient world, it was the king who was responsible for protecting and defending the widow and the orphan. It was he who was accountable for their well-being. Remember, according to Genesis 1, we are all kings and queens. We are all royalty in the sight of God because we have all been created in God's image. That means that we are all responsible for the fate of the downtrodden and the vulnerable. What we encounter in the very first chapter of the Bible is a broadening, a sharing of moral responsibility. It is not just the king or whatever other kind of leader you may have who is responsible. You and I are responsible too. These days, the rankest forms of racism, bigotry, misogyny, and xenophobia prevail in the very highest levels of our country's government. And like the false prophets of old, many religious leaders fawn. They would bless and excuse the powerful in their disdain for the weak and marginalized. Well, just as Jesus was the hope for the Roman centurion or of the woman taken in adultery, we are their only hope. Genesis 1 still beckons. the God of Genesis 1, still beckons. The only question is, how will we respond? Can you help me move the table back before the stuff on it gets wet?